Yeah, booyaka, booyaka, booyaka.
Yes. Yeah, did you peep? Like, do you peep how it always starts off slow and then it kind of like, and then just.
You talking about the intro?
The beat, yeah, the intro beat.
Yeah, that joint does come on a little slow.
Yeah, my bad. I definitely was random right there.
No, that's how we do. You know what I'm saying? We crosses and we can be random if we want to. It's our podcast. We can cry if we want to. Cry if we want to. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we talk rap, we talk life, we talk social media, we talk Christ, we talk everything. Ain't got proof. Because we're cross-examined and you can't handle the two. That joint.
He couldn't handle the tooth.
I couldn't handle the two. Over here looking like Mad Magazine.
What happened?
That joint, man, it was Wakanda Forever. I was watching Wakanda Forever last Saturday, eating some popcorn, drinking the frozen icy and frozen cherry. And that joint, I just felt like, man, what's in my... And then that joint just...
It was your tooth?
It was my tooth.
Wow, that's
I got to get it. I'm supposed to get a root canal.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, they told me it was
going. The icy and the tooth is just chilling there.
The joint was just chilling. It was, you know.
Did you feel like you was like young boy status, like a kid back in the day?
Nah, not really.
Hold on, I'm being interrupted right now by my wife. Hang on, ladies and gentlemen.
You know what I'm saying?
This is a most important interruption.
This is it. Babe. This is a live interruption.
She's leaving to the store. She'll be back. Okay.
She'll be back.
Love you, baby. Be very careful. All right. Okay. All right. Got
live motivated.
Live on it. This is
That's how we do it. Yeah. Man, we back to the grill again. The grill again. Back to the grill again. The grill again. Season 5, episode 7.
Whoa. We almost forgot. Like, it was like, what?
Yeah. Episode 7, man. It's been good. It's good to be back, man. We've been doing a couple things, been gone some time, man. Life has just been crazy, man.
Bananas.
I know on my end, I was in Cali preaching and doing some photography, came back. My son had COVID. My wife had COVID. One of my sons had COVID. He ended up missing 2 weeks of school. He had COVID and bronchitis. My wife had COVID, then it went away by Saturday, she was good. By Monday, my other son now had major flu symptoms. I took them both to the patient first, and that's when he got diagnosed with COVID. My other son had the flu, and I just had a little bit of congestion and all that. A couple days later, my wife gets bronchitis, right? And then after that, my oldest son, then he got basically COVID-like symptoms. It was boom, 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 boom. So by the grace of God, I escaped with just minor stuff, but we were just out of it, and so it was just challenging to think through. Like when we do these shows, we work, we put together some effort, we think through these things, we do some research. It was just tough to do that the last couple of weeks. So that's, from my side, that's partly why we haven't been here, but we are back to the grill again. I know, Strack, you got some stuff.
You should have dramatized it a little bit and, added the tooth in with the COVID, John.
That's what I should have done.
COVID took your tooth, you know.
I should have done that too. I should have.
You missed the opportunity, fam.
I did miss that opportunity, bro. But that's,
So what's been going on with me? Like you, man, it's been crazy. It's been bananas. So this past month, we found out that my wife had cancer. So she started getting, I know that's like a major bomb drop, you know what I'm saying? But she started getting some pains and discomforts, and we went into the ER, and they wound up doing scans, CAT scans and stuff like that. And then they found a mass in her colon, so it needed to be removed. They have since then removed it. This is, again, within the past month and some change. They since then removed the mass, part of her colon, and 28 lymph nodes, which came back negative for spreading. Praise God.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So she was diagnosed with stage 2C. There's a little bit of complications, but nothing too crazy. The doctor feels pretty comfortable with the process and how everything is going. Right now, she is in recovery. Praise God. She's healing up from the surgery. It's been about 2.5 weeks since the surgery, maybe a little bit longer. And she's now finally up into the 70 percentile as far as her health. So she feels like she's about 70%. And which, you go through something like that, fam, it makes you realize what's important, for real. Yeah. You begin to question everything, it's one of those scenarios that the Lord kind of uses to just wake you up, you know, and
Yeah.
like, hey, you should be focusing more on me. You know, you should be focusing more on what really, really matters. You know, like
Right, yeah, well
like
said.
your wife. You know, like caring for those around you.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, we've been learning. So I almost sound like back in the Weezer been okay,
right,
you know.
Right, yeah, there you go. Hey, boss. There you go.
We've been learning that the Lord, you know, builds us through suffering, man. He
Yeah.
perseveres you. You know,
Yeah.
he keeps you. He gives you the strength you need, and
Well said.
oftentimes you'll find yourself ministering to others when you think you need ministered to the most.
Yeah.
You know, you find
Yeah.
yourself ministering to others and loving on the others
Yeah, well
in the
said.
process. So yeah,
That's
that's
dope,
a
bro.
quick little update.
Hey, look, man, don't think I don't notice them lights in the background, my G. I see you over there.
They was there though.
I
That's
see
been
you.
there.
I see you though. I'm over
just
here with
finagled.
the flat light, and you over there. Look, I'm gonna have to bring out the joints, the nan lights next episode, and switch it up. You know what I'm saying? Stir it up.
Do it.
You know what I'm saying? Well, listen, y'all. We the good news is my family's healthy. Strack's wife is doing better. Right before
Praise God.
Thanksgiving, man. Happy
Amen.
Thanksgiving,
Amen.
y'all. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes.
We're gonna clap that up. Thanksgiving. And if you want to if you woke, is happy taken from the Indigenous Peoples Day and celebrating it. You know what I'm saying? So happy.
Which is crazy. I've actually been watching a lot of stuff on that lately, man. It's bananas. What
No,
was
it's crazy.
done,
No,
though,
it's no for real. I mean, but you can't say anything about that because you woke.
can't. You can't.
If you
You can't.
just bring up history, unless it's celebratory, right? Then it's woke.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating. It's so funny to me.
You can't
It's-
be
it's
nothing
just-
but thankful.
Yeah, it can't be nothing but thankful. I mean, Thanksgiving for the believers all the time, right? So I don't
sure.
need to celebrate. I don't need the last Thursday of November to be thankful, right? I cultivate by the grace of God being thankful every day.
Amen.
So I'm not worried about. I mean, yeah, we're gonna eat and whatever. But it's an American holiday. It has nothing to do with
Real.
Christ.
It's
ain't
just
no
the day we get together to bang some banging food.
right.
And,
It's
there
a
are
couple days
ministry-
off of work. You know what I'm saying?
There are evangelistic opportunities though on that day.
Yeah,
for
because
sure.
you're running into your family and all that,
definitely.
right? So we doing that. So yeah, hope y'all Thanksgiving is good. You got anything you looking forward to, man? Any dishes? Anything in particular?
Yeah.
That you feel like you do?
all of
I'm
it
talking.
from
I'm
the
talking
gate.
about. But like, is there Thanksgiving? Like, you know, we only eat this at Thanksgiving.
I
But
mean,
what is that?
The sweet corn, fam. The sweet
Woo.
corn's gotta stand out. You know,
Slim.
the sweet corn that my mom makes, she gets down.
Every year, my mom has a dish called corn pudding, bro.
Yes, that's it.
And that's what it is. And my mom always be like, she'll tell me like, you know, don't eat a lot of this. You know what I'm saying? You need to lose some weight. She always give me that. I'm saying, hey, Ma, listen, that's true. But you might go home and be with the Lord, and this will be the last time I had this. Don't take that from me right now, Ma.
And it's only once a year.
It's only
Like,
once
come
a
on,
year.
Ma.
Like, stop. Listen, me eating this corn pudding this year ain't gonna do nothing. Me not eating it ain't gonna change this no how. So it's like this once a year. So Ma, go ahead, Ma. I'm sure, right? So, but yes, happy taking from Indigenous Peoples Day, all that stuff, man, and celebrate it. Crazy. American history is wild, man.
It's crazy. Wow.
Hey, but that's why Christians think we the Jews, man. That manifest destiny, go into the land of Canaan and take over.
Right.
Now that was
There's
before
two sides
Christ.
to every story.
It
two
is.
sides to every story.
It's two sides, and then there's the truth, right? So you got
Right.
all of that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to go pick up your copy of Serial Killer Still Smiling, the mixtape. It is exclusively on KurtKennedy.com on Bandcamp. That's intentional. It's just, to me, it's a mixtape. Other people like it more than that, but I am releasing another project in February, on February 7th, which is 9-year anniversary of the Frustrated Christian introduction. That album is called I'm Warning You, Do Not Listen to This Album. It is the most personal album I've written in a long time, and it will talk about some of the honest reflections of what it's like to be a pastor in this kind of day and age. So that album is going to encourage and offend people all in the same song. So I encourage you to get ready for that.
So you're going to do what you normally do.
I'm going to do what I normally do. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to do what I do when that happens. All right. Before we get into what we're talking about, we got a crazy episode for y'all today. Y'all know how we do. But before we get into that, I think it would only be right if we have a brief conversation on last Monday Night Football, where the undefeated Philadelphia Eagles ran into the under 500 Washington Redskins. And Philly took the L train. They took the L train, ladies and gentlemen. The only game that everyone was watching, and we came out.
Heineke got his start now. I mean, he's starting now off of that joint.
Yeah, we should have never picked up because if it was the Philly quarterback Carson Wentz, we would have got smoked.
No. He's a commander.
No.
He is a commander.
Who? No, he's a former Philly
Carson,
quarterback.
the commander
that helped y'all win a Super Bowl. Set
Nick Foles win no Super Bowl.
You
man.
crazy?
Nick Foles won the Super Bowl.
No, Nick Foles came in after y'all was like 9 or 10 and 0. Y'all was balling that year.
2 years in a row, though, man.
No, y'all was balling, yeah, because y'all had a team set up, but Carson Wentz gave y'all that confidence. Don't rob that man of that Super Bowl ring. Don't take it from him. You know what I'm saying?
He gave us one solid year, man. One solid year.
But I'm excited, man. We got the hottest team. We one of the hottest teams now. We back 4 out of 5 wins in a row. I'll be at the game Sunday against the Falcons. I'm going to preach and then be gone. And my church already knows, listen, if you got a lot of stuff you need to talk to me about, I'll talk to you after 4 p.m. I'm going to the game. Send a memo. That's how we doing it. All right, ladies and gentlemen. And I know we're a little bit behind. We were going to talk about this last week, but we obviously weren't here, so we said that. But the midterm elections came in, and the proposed red wave. I mean, it was I can show you this YouTube video of all the conservatives from Ben Shapiro on down,
that's
right,
why I switched up,
mid right. They all were like, it's going to be a red wave, a bloodbath, blah 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 blah. And then Trump was supporting a bunch of politicians. And the red wave was cooled off by the blue ripple. So, and there's a lot that happened there. Now, I personally, just to be clear, because I talk against conservatives a lot, I want to make sure people hear this from me. I am a conservative. I've never voted Democrat in my life. And for my own personal convictions, I would never vote Democrat for a lot of reasons. And not just abortion and this and that. I have my own reasons why I just couldn't vote Democrat. That's just me. That's just me personally. But I also have a problem with conservatives because conservatives take the moral high ground and self-righteously think they're better than everybody who's not conservative. And because I see them and came from them, I call them out a lot. I am officially non-binary when it comes to voting. I'm just waiting until Jesus returns, and you can get offended at that. Take a number, right?
So you're voting fluid.
I am
a fluid voter.
I'm fluid. I am non-binary. I'm not. What is it? I'm nonpartisan when it comes to voting. I just don't vote. I don't vote anymore, honestly, because I think as a pastor, I watched the political system become the golden calf, and I saw so many people bow down to it that it became really challenging to care for people because they would only receive from you based on what they thought, who they thought you voted for. Mm-hmm. So I realized, I'm not obligated to vote as a pastor, but I'm obligated to pastor people. And so I just said, you know what, I'm just going to pause from that. So I don't vote. So I comment on these things, and I talk about, we've been talking about things for years, and it's incredible to see these things manifest in ways that we've been talking about years ago, Strack. We've been talking about stuff for years.
I voted straight Republican, and I got poured on by the blue ripple. Word up. PA did nothing. PA just stayed the same. They was like, we like Wolf. Let's have another Wolf around. Man.
That joint was crazy, bro. So the conservatives got rocked. They thought, and it was crazy. So here's what people are saying. That most of the blame is gone in pretty much 3 directions. One is that there was a lack of early voting. So conservatives, because they are skeptical of the whole voting system, waited until the day and didn't do the early ballot voting, which a lot of Democrats apparently did. And so they're saying we need to get more people out there doing early voting. We didn't take it seriously. So that was one. The second was, again, what I just said, lack of confidence in a rigged system. So there were conservatives that supposedly are still feeling the bitterness from the election presumably being stolen by Trump. It's a couple years, 4 years ago, 2 years ago, whatever. So there's that. But then a lot of people in the conservative camp blamed President Trump. They blamed Trump, which I thought was fascinating to watch this. Yeah. And Trump is to blame in some level. Like when you come out, right, and you attack Ron DeSantis, who is a conservative darling right now. I mean, Florida handled the COVID very well. I mean, Florida went.
Didn't Trump heads want DeSantis to be on the Trump card for 2024?
Yes. Okay. And he called him Ron DeSanctimonious and was saying in Trump fashion that Ron DeSantis, he has all this dirt on Ron DeSantis. He wouldn't have won if it wasn't for him, all this stuff, right? So people are basically saying that the president, all the people that he vouched for, all lost, is what they said. They said they lost. And even the people, the Republicans that should have won by a landslide, had a dogfight in all these situations. So a ton of conservatives were saying, Trump's done, he's washed up, we need to move on from him. And they told him not to announce his election, that he was running for president, until after the Ralph Warnock, Herschel Walker debacle down in Georgia, I think, is where it is. So they told him to do it. So typical Trump fast. Trump, listen, let me just say this. This is I don't have a political bone in my body, so I think Joe Biden has dementia, and I think Donald Trump is deceiver, right? So I'm an equal opportunity offender. So Trump is not a conservative. Trump is a Caesar, fam. Trump is not a conservative. He's not a politician. He's not a Republican.
Trump is an opportunist.
He's an opportunist. He's a Caesar, fam. Trump will kill Brutus and anybody, Mark Antony, anybody that's in his way, man. If you in his way, he doesn't think like, hey, if he was a conservative, he'd be like, hey, Ron DeSantis held it down for us. Let me work. He's attacking the dude because he's a threat.
Did you see the video back in the 80s where he said he would run Republican? Like he was a Democrat at the time, and if he ran for president, he would run Republican.
Nah, I ain't see it. You talking about is it Trump?
Yeah, this was Trump back in the day.
Donald Trump.
It's
Donald Trump. So I didn't see it, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's all coming to fruition, right? So
for sure.
So here we go again. It's crazy, right? All right. So because of that, some of the backlash also came as politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others were running on a Christian nationalism platform. So in particular interviews, she would profess to be a Christian and would say that Christianity, we need to run on a Christian nationalism platform, which then put Christian nationalism back into the national spotlight in a considerable way. Now, Strack and I have a little bit of a history with this issue, Christian nationalism, because for years we had been talking about, ever since 2018, August 2018, is when John MacArthur revealed that he had had a phone call with then President Trump, and he told him that no true Christian would vote Democrat. Once John MacArthur said that, it gave license to all the people who may have felt that way, but wouldn't have really said it that way, come out of the woodworks. So this was season 3 for us on Cross Examine, and we did an episode on can you be a Christian and vote Democrat? And we did an episode, can you be a Christian and vote Republican? We looked at all the issues and all of it, and we did that. Go back and look at those on iTunes and Spotify. I'm not going to get into those now. But when that happened in 2018, it was at the same time when there was pushback from that particular side, the conservative side, with a statement against social justice also was written and came out around that time, in the same August 2018. So there was this sort of idea that this was happening, and then all of a sudden you can't vote. So this idea of Christian nationalism started to come out as a critique against mostly white conservatives for their seemingly idolization of Trump. So there was a dismissal of Trump's character traits, right? But a approval of policies. So that's when it started to come. So this term Christian nationalism was essentially, it seemed like, and this is what we're going to get into in a second, it seemed like it was a pushback to the term woke, right? So, and let me back up for a minute. Let me say something about this. So initially, when all of the woke stuff, when it became woke, it started off as social justice warrior, right? And this came because initially it started off with some black evangelicals were struggling with law enforcement taking the life of young black men and there being no consequences. This eventually became what the hashtag Black Lives Matter and all that came from that. So there were genuine concerns about just really justice issues that then became your social justice warrior, right? And then it became a Marxist, right? Cultural Marxist. Then it became, eventually you got to woke. And then woke included all kinds of things. So it wasn't just you're caring about seemingly injustice, but it became LGBT, affirmation, all these different things, right?
Yes.
So tell me, do you remember that, Strack? Do you remember all that?
I do. Yeah, I do definitely remember all that. Yep, that was definitely going on. Now, 2018 rolled right into the whole COVID time. I mean, that whole time frame, like everything just kind of bottlenecked right into COVID.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, that was a wild time, man. It was definitely a wild time.
It was crazy. So all that happens, right? And then there's these. So Christian nationalism, the term, came more from people who would be considered on the left, and it was targeting people on the right who seemingly had racialized idolatry to Donald Trump. It was a negative term. Okay. Now in January of 2021. I was on stage with Vodi Bakum. I was debating him and Tim Brindle and Strack and Vince Cooley, who used to be on podcasts, the Basement podcast. We were cool with these folks, good people. They were hosts. It was a Wrath and Grace event, and in this particular debate, the question of Christian nationalism came up, and so it was asked to Vodi, who was sitting on my right. He was asked the question first. I'm paraphrasing, but Vodi essentially didn't know what it was. He said he didn't know what it was, but what he did say was that he thought that the term was basically a backlash, an attack from those who were woke on the left, aimed at people who don't agree with woke ideology, leftist ideology.
What year was that again?
This was January 2021.
2021, okay.
When we had that debate. This was out in Lancaster, January, so almost 2 years ago. So that was Vodi's response. He said that he thought Christian nationalism was basically a false idea that's promulgated by the left attacking the right because they don't agree with woke ideology. That's what he said.
Right, yeah, I remember that pretty clearly.
And then you asked me, Kurt, what would you say it is? And that's when I said, well, I didn't say his name at the time, but it was John MacArthur. I said once he made that claim about you can't vote this and that, then that became sort of a one-size-fits-all onslaught of different people fighting over the political ideologies. And it began with that. And it basically was a way to push back against people acting like Republicans and conservatism is the only way a Christian should vote. We're not here to debate that issue. We're just giving you some of the history. All right.
Right.
So that happens. And now here we are, almost 2 years later, where this term, where at first it was a negative term, it was sort of a slur against the white Christian right, but not just Christian, just white conservatives. It was a slur against them that they were not adopting, and then eventually it's turned into a word that they now are owning, right? So this word went from, man, that's just us. They're just trying to find a word to get back at us because of woke. And then it turned into a word that many Christians now are saying it's who they are and what they should be about. So case in point, here is a book called, and this is the definitive work right now on the positive side of it, The Case for Christian Nationalism by Stephen Wolfe. Okay. So I want to say a couple things in this track. I want you to jump into this. So here's what Christian nationalism has become. And here's ironic. Christian nationalism is the new nigga. All right? It's the new nigga. And I mean Nigga. And let me explain what I mean by that. So nigger, ER, is a word that many of us know what it means. It was a racial slur aimed at black people to denigrate their humanity. Over time, black people adopted this word, flipped it, took the ER off, and added an A to it. So it went from nigger, which was said by white people, to nigga, right? Which it became a term of endearment. And other races use it too. Other people use it that are not black. But it's typically a word that you only supposed to say if you black. There's a lot of black people that do not like that word. They think, how could you take a word and try to justify using it when it has such a bad background and all this stuff? But there's a lot of black people, and I've been one of those black people. I use the word as a slang word, as a word of a term of endearment. I'm not here to debate that. I think we did a show on that a long time ago. You can go find that as well. But Christian nationalism is the new nigga. And this is what I mean. They're taking a word that was used negatively and turning it into a positive thing that you should be about. I respect that, being black and knowing what the N-word, what nigga meant, right? I respect that. But on another level, here's the problem I have. When black people say the word nigga, we're not attaching any righteous biblical claim to that word, all right? Christian nationalists who are taking this word are stamping a biblical ideology to this. So this guy wrote a book, 400 pages, basically saying the Bible endorses Christian nationalism. Now, from what I've read, he says some decent stuff, but it's actually kind of dangerous. And so here's why. This is one of my greatest concerns for the term Christian nationalism and being the new nigga. Here's what's happening. A lot of people who claim this word, they're mostly going to be the conservative side, the majority of them. As a matter of fact, all of them. I don't know anybody who's not conservative that agrees with this term and sees it as a good thing. And is trying to make it a good thing. Here's two concerns I have. All right. When black people started to bring up concerns for historical and current oppression or mistreatment from the powers that be, law enforcement, no matter what they tried to explain, when black people were called cultural Marxists, nobody even knew who Marx was, right? I know dudes who had to go up and do research to find out who Marx was. And they were like, we don't agree with this dude. We just saying that the civil rights era may have ended by law, but the racial attitude still exists in the heart. And we see those play out in certain dynamics, and that's what we're talking about. All those people were called social justice warriors, cultural Marxists, and no matter how hard they tried, even a guy like Eric Mason who wrote Woke Church, he wrote woke not because he's approving of the way that the conservatives framed woke to mean, but because he was trying to get at black people who were being told they need to wake up and be woke against Christianity. And he wrote, this is what it means to be woke as a church. He wasn't talking about approving of all the things that woke is now associated with in this day and age. The conservatives would not allow, even with the most genuine explanations of what they're meaning, they would not allow anyone. They've made fun of every way you try to justify speaking up against cultural injustices as a social justice warrior, culture Marxist, and now woke. Now everything is just under woke, right? But the Christian nationalists are doing the same thing. They're taking a word that has clear things. You're redefining it, but look at how they're positively framing it, right? So it's so ironic to me that you won't let this side take a term and they say, that's not what we mean. Here's what we're talking about. You denigrate them, treat them as non-Christians, right? But then now you're trying to make up the term that's used negatively against you. You're twisting it and making it something positive and encouraging people to embrace it. But it was sinful when the other side did it, but it's biblical when your side does it. That's a problem. That's a problem. And the Lord is dealing with that now. We'll get to that in a moment. Here's the other reason why it's a problem. So one, the hypocrisy. There's hypocrisy, right? But then two, you are creating an idea that is largely based on an economic system, and that's opposite of your political opposition. Many of the people who are saying they're Christian nationalists now, they're not saying it because they've read this book and they agree with it. This book just came out a couple weeks ago. They haven't read this book, and they're not walking you through a systematic understanding of what the Bible teaches about cultural political engagement, because you won't find much, right? They're claiming to be Christian nationalists. You know why? Because it pisses their political opposition off. That's why they're doing it. They're not Christian nationalists because they really believe in that. They're doing it because it makes the left mad. That's why they're doing it. It makes the left mad. That's what they're doing. They haven't read this book, and this book just came out. Now, this book makes some helpful arguments. I don't agree with a lot of it, but I think it makes some helpful arguments from what I'm aware of. But it's interesting that, one, you wouldn't let the other side try to define who they are, and that's usually the black people. But then the white people get to define who they are, and it gets to be accepted and embraced. What a church. This is so ironic. And you wonder why Strack and I have been talking about being theological. You wonder why. So the case for Christian nationalism. So Strack, I want you to step up to the plate here. And I know we've thought about this, and there's a lot more to say. We at the tip of the iceberg, ladies and gentlemen. We got some stuff we're gonna get at. But I think it's helpful to understand that this is what it is to me. It's the new nigga. It's trying to redefine the term, slap biblical on it, make it Christian, and all of that. And I just think it's like, wow, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's what stands out to me right away the most is the idea. Well, I mean, if you just think about the phraseology, so you got Christian, you got nationalism, two terms that would tie to identity in a major way, and not just identity, but also anchor you to a geographical position. So like Christian is anchored geographically to wherever Christ is. Right? That's where we're supposed to be. That's where we'll be for eternity. That's where we'll always be. So, but nationalist is anchored to a nation, right? So how are you anchored to Christ and anchored to a nation at the same time? Unless that nation is Christ's nation, right? So if that's the case, and that's how we think through this logically, because that would be a logical way to think through it, then when you say Christian nationalists and you apply it to an American context, now you're saying that our nation is the Christian nation by implication. So you're doubling down on the idea that this was a Christian nation from the beginning. Right?
Yeah.
And now you're saying we're actually even more Christian nation now because we're Christian and we're here in this nation and we're going to fight and be military and be strategic because we're called to take dominion. You know what I'm saying? So the thing is, we're not home. Like, this isn't our home. No. This ain't our nation. This is America has not been given to us by God to act like we are in heaven. Like that's not what this nation was blessed for. You know what I'm saying? Like,
well said.
Come on, people. Christian nationalists, they don't go together. I mean, but anyway, that's me. So
yeah, and they would have ways that they push back. They would go to Great Commission. Sure. You want to make disciples and all. That's kind of the way they bleed through it. But there's some errors.
Don't say make nations.
Yeah, right.
Don't say make nations. Right.
There's some errors, and we're gonna bleed through. We're gonna get to that as well. It's interesting. The other part of this to me is in just hearing all what you're saying and pivoting off of that. What I find interesting is that the Christian nationalists now, those are the conservatives and those who would be Christian nationalists. Here's what's interesting to me, and I tweeted this actually earlier today. and I put this on Facebook, and I put a lot of stuff, and I used to get a lot of comments, but no one's commented on this. A few people have on Twitter. Here's what I said. I said this. Just about all the complaints by black people about not trusting the government, the FBI, being oppressed, and finding it difficult to feed our families was called woke, largely by white conservatives who are now saying the exact same things. This is the irony of it to me. This is why I love watching the Lord work. All those things that were called woke from 2012 to 2020 are now things that they're saying about themselves. We're oppressed by the media, the leftist agenda. And I'm not saying there's not truth in that. That's not what I'm saying. But why is it true when it happens to you? See, the Lord is out. You're saying you're oppressed, but you said there was no oppression. There's no oppression, though. That's called victimology, right? That's what it was called when black people said that there's no oppression, even though we have more of a documented history of those things, right? Documented examples. It was all black people woke. It was all stuff, right? You got that. You say that you can't trust the government. We've been saying that since we got here, right? We've been saying this since we got here. Now white conservatives are saying you can't trust the government unless they're guys in government, right? They don't trust the FBI. Well, we've been saying that since Martin Luther King, right? So again, you have all of these arguments that were used, that were called woke all this time, are now white Christian nationalist concerns. It is fascinating, and the Lord sees it all. Right? Pew Research article entitled, in their own words, How Christians Describe Christian Nationalism. Now, let me just say this about these articles, right? These articles, to me, these polls are somewhat of a sham. I don't know why they make the claim that such and such of U.S. adults when you only ask like 1,700 people. You cannot speak for 354 million people by asking 1,700. But nonetheless, this is what we do. So here's what this Pew Research is, one of the most credible. Here's what they said. Read just 2 paragraphs, and this is going to be insane. Public attention to the concept of Christian nationalism has grown rapidly in the past few years. Google Trends data shows a significant rise in searches for the term following the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol. You know why? Because that's when the term really took off. When you were calling all those people who would attack the Capitol, you were calling them, they were out there with preaching and singing worship songs while they stormed the Capitol. People were getting killed, stepped on, and they were making it seem like Christ is pleased with that. So there were significant rises in search for the term following the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol, and searches for the term peaked in July 22nd after Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we just talked about, declared in an interview, "We need to be the party of nationalism, and I'm a Christian, and I say it proudly, we should be Christian nationalists." Several other religious and political leaders also recently have embraced the Christian nationalist label. And they have a link to, so everything we're saying is all documented. We're not just making stuff up because we're woke, right? Despite the growing attention, less is known about how the U.S. public views Christian nationalism. A new Pew Research Center survey finds that more than half of all U.S. adults, 54%, have not heard or read anything about Christian nationalism. Do you know they said the same thing about Marxism, cultural Marxism? Mm-hmm. People had never heard of it. They didn't know what it was. When I did the debate with Vodi Bakum, I asked the crowd, how many of you in your churches have people bringing up CRT? This is what people are like, we never even heard of it. I said, how many people in your churches are bringing up CRT and trying to overthrow your churches? And not one person raised their hand. We had, 300-400 people in the room?
At least, yeah.
Yeah, not one person raised their hand. I was like, okay, so you haven't even heard of this. The same exact, it's so odd that it's the exact same thing just from the conservative side. It's so interesting. The Lord is funny. An additional 16% of Americans have heard at least a little about Christian nationalism, but say they have neither a favorable nor unfavorable view of it, and they don't know enough to take a position. about 1/4 of all Americans, 24%, express an unfavorable view of Christian nationalism, while 5% view it favorably. Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't, because of just the time, I didn't have time to, but I wish I could pull up, because I don't like to say things just to say them. It's staggering how almost identical this language is in light of CRT and the influence and effect of CRT. And yet this group now is saying we need to be proud because you put the name Christian on it, right?
Right.
That becomes, oh, we can get behind it. But can you really? Because in attacking those on the other side, while calling them, well, you partnered with people who were not believers, and we talked about this a ton. You mocked people who you had fellowship with and relationship with that you know are believers, but because they disagreed with you in a political sense or about some particular economic issues or justice issues, you treated them as non-believers, and you elevated people like atheist James Lindsay. All right. So James Lindsay is an avowed atheist who I watched from 2018 until probably earlier this year. This dude, particularly the Southern Baptist pastors and the Southern Baptists, they elevated him and treated him with such respect.
He was speaking at conferences.
He was speaking at conferences, pastors' conferences.
An atheist.
Was speaking at pastors' conferences. Vodi Bakum quoted him in his book, Fault Lines, plenty of times. I watched him give his website out as a resource. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, but what happened was you elevated this atheist above other real brothers in the faith because you disagreed with them and wouldn't let them explain what they meant with the concerns that they were voicing. And now you're doing the same thing on the other side. So what does the Lord do? Well, James Lindsay has a lot of influence. And he's back on Twitter after being exiled. Elon Trump has brought him back. And he is on fire. And guess who he's aiming at? The same Christians who elevated him as like the Pope of cultural Marxism. The same people that treated him better than they treated genuine believers. He is now coming after them because what? They're Christian nationalists. I believe Malcolm X, in the immortal words of Malcolm X, when he was asked about John F. Kennedy's assassination, said, it looks like the chickens have come home to roost. Here's some of the tweets that James Lindsay has put out in the last 24 hours. Here's what he says. I'd like the Christian nationalists to explain which government agencies they'll establish or empower to determine which types of Christian worship are acceptable and which they'll enforce, which they're empowered to enforce. Do the Mormons count? Will you send the Christ BI? The FBI, but the Christ BI. I responded and said, keep going, bro. God is using you. I responded to his tweet. Because now the dude that was at pastors' conferences, that was the darling when he was speaking out against social justice, now that these guys are claiming Christian nationalism, he's on the attack. Here's what else he said. I heard the brain... Now, this guy has hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter. He's popular, but he's an atheist. He doesn't care about the things of God. He was using the church and these pastors. They were paying him tons of money, sending people to his website, treating this guy as like the hero of the faith and calling guys like Tim Keller cowards.
All because he agreed with them on social, economic things.
Go figure.
Like, yo, man, it's wild. It's wild the way the way the Lord judges
Lord
his church.
does.
Yeah,
It reminds me
wild.
of First Kings when David and Joab and them, they destroy a whole, like, basically ethnicity, but
Right.
a few of them get away, and they thought they were wiped out. And when it comes, God uses the one of those dudes, to rise up, get an army, and come back to fight Israel later. It's kind of like that in God's sovereignty. You raised up all these pastors, learning from this dude, talking about this dude, reading their books. What you doing, boy? I was like, man, my cat was rubbing my. I was like, no, it's on my leg. My cat was rubbing my leg. Right.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they probably helped like really build up his influence.
Bro.
They probably added 100,000 to his followers. You know what I'm saying?
100%. And what's funny is he's an atheist. He had to be there. Like, these people are idiots. I don't agree with these people at all.
Right.
But I'll take their money.
Right.
I'll speak at. What you doing, little one? What you doing, man? I'll speak at their conferences. I'll do this. I'll do that. I'll make money from these suckers. I'll do these videos, the G8 conference and the G3, whatever they were. This guy was everywhere. And I was like, wow, they're treating him better than actual people they know are brothers. So now he's tweeting stuff like this. I heard the brain geniuses on the new right, in quotations, who want to break up the United States and hand the pieces to the World Economic Forum want to execute me for not going to their church. In presuming to speak for God in such a way, they blaspheme. Hope it works out. Hope it works out for them. This dude is just coming after him. And it's not him, it's the Lord. The Lord's raising this dude up to now spit in the face of these people who spit in the face of other believers. It's
the thing we have to consider too is nobody's really talking about this that I know of. So
yeah, not like us.
If anybody's diving into James Lindsay and looking into what he's saying or whatever, imagine like the amount of. It's just crazy the blowback that this dude is now like. All these churches, all these pastors that he's been around, he's heard their spews, he's heard the gospel probably, more than likely. He's heard all kinds of conversations. He's heard how they think and view America
100%.
Politically. You know what I'm saying? Like he's heard all of these things, I'm sure, because he's been in so we know how these conferences get down. They go eat afterwards. And especially you got a guy like James Lindsay there. He's a celebrity in the midst of them.
Celebrity.
Hands down, he's a celebrity in the midst of them because that's the way it works. Mm-hmm. So him being a celebrity, listening to everyone and all this, he has so much ammunition to then turn around and be like, wait, y'all want to kill homosexuals? Y'all want to... Because really, he was around mostly theonomists. I mean, that's who he would have been.
Yeah, he was around them a lot, yeah.
And that's who is really embracing... I'd venture to say, at risk of being wrong, that the majority of the people embracing Christian nationalism hold to a more like a theonomist type perspective, or post-millennial. Yeah. They're definitely... all about transforming the nation to the way God wants it to be now to usher in the return of Christ. Like, this stuff is wild, fam. This stuff is wild.
Well, it's wild, and I think, and there's a lot of people who may be offended at this, but listen, man, this isn't about being woke. We're just talking facts right now, right? We're just talking facts. So if you're offended, I'm sorry you're offended. And if you don't follow us anymore, thanks for coming for when you did. But this is just reality.
People just need to check what really matters.
Yeah, this is reality.
What really matters? What matters in your household and spills over into your community and into your streets? What really matters? Like
100%. So to further prove what you were saying, Strack, about just this sense of like what really matters and the people who have sort of a view. Here's the thing, the reality is politically, right? Your eschatology is going to form your politics in many ways.
For sure.
If you think the world is, if you're post-mill, you think the world's going to submit itself to Christ and you're going to talk like that. It bugs me that people act like their political engagement philosophy comes straight out of the Bible.
Right.
When it just doesn't. So let's talk about that real quick. Let's get to that.
Yes, let's do that.
On Cross Politic, which is another podcast. These are brothers that I've been on their show. We like these with Gabe, Toby, and Knox.
Yep.
These are good dudes. I like these dudes. I don't agree with everything they say. These guys are theonomists and things like that. And but on their show, interviewing him, this book, Case for Christian Nationalism, Stephen Wolfe, he wrote it for Canon Press, which is largely connected to Doug Wilson. Out in Moscow, Idaho. So they're theonomists. So they're going to love this book. Well, when they asked him to define nationalism and sort of what does he mean by Christian nationalism, but Knox asked him to define nationalism. Here's what he said, and this is a verbatim quote, minus the uhs and pauses. Here's what he said. Nationalism is a collective sense of we. So this is what he's after as a Christian nationalism. This is what he means. A collective sense of we. We as a collective entity exist, and then we are going to arrange ourselves for our God. And that God includes earthly and heavenly life. So this is what he's saying. Let me read this again. When he said, can you define what nationalism is? And he was kind of saying, okay, this is what I'm after when I say Christian nationalist. A collective sense of we. We as a collective entity exist, and then we're going to arrange ourselves for our God, and that God includes earthly and heavenly life. That's kind of his definition.
So real quick, this sounds like he's lessening Christianity. It sounds like he's bringing it down to the other world views and saying, hey, let's throw it in the pot because it's a good one. Let's really tote this one as the best one amongst all the other ones. When as Christians, we don't do that. Like we don't look at the other world views as equal to our worldview because we believe we have the truth versus everything else, which is a copycat or a blatant lie. You know, so I don't understand why even the desire to elevate Christian nationalism, because it really makes Christianity level with all the other worldviews, in my opinion.
Well, you know what's interesting? That's an interesting take. I hadn't thought about it like that. That's actually an interesting thought. I think the challenge with this definition is that it works in a theocracy, but not a democracy.
Yeah.
Right? So think about it. I'm going to read the definition again because I think it's important to understand. Here's a definition that he said. This is what he said on Cross Politic. If he said something different in the book, I'm quoting what he said on Cross Politic. He said it's a collective sense of we. We as a collective entity exist, and then we are going to arrange ourselves for our God, and that God includes earthly and heavenly life. Okay? In a democracy that's not largely a Christian nation, here's two challenges here. Here's two challenges. One, as a believer, right? I believe in the Christian tradition. I'm a Christian, a pastor. As a believer, of course you want to see people become Christians and submit to Jesus.
Facts. Right.
Of course.
That's what
we desire that, right? But again, based on my eschatology and my understanding of the Bible, that's never going to happen. In fact, if you believe in the doctrine of election, then you know that some people are not the elect. They're not going to be given salvation as the gift in the way that you believe people who are elected are.
Right.
So and the reason why I'm bringing that up is because this is largely a reformed understanding of culture according to the book. This guy's reformed, but the doctrine of election eliminates to me postmillennialism. And it eliminates theonomy because they're not going to have people all submit to Christ in this life. It's just not going to happen. Right? But because we're Christian, this is the hook. Oh, we want to be Christians and we want to go for the nations. And you take Matthew 28 and go and you read it, but you realize you have to understand that that's not what they mean. So when you hear this definition, then you see what some of the problem is. So here's the problem. In the democracy, there are a bunch of collective we's that exist in the democracy. There's a bunch of collective definitions of we's, right? Christians are not the only we that exists. And we're not the only collective entity that worships a God that we think should be worshipped by everyone.
That's why I said what I said about
100%.
bringing it down. That's exactly why. Yep.
That's why I'm doubling down with you. I'm agreeing with you.
Yep.
That's the challenge. Is you're basically that. So that's one challenge. But Strack's making a good point. I'm coming also from this angle is like, look, Muslims can say that, right? Muslims can say, look, we're a collective group in America. There's millions of us.
Right.
We worship Allah. We think Sharia, he's God. We think Sharia law should be imposed, and we want to impose that law. Like, this sounds good when you're a Christian because you think, oh, okay, yeah, I'm a Christian, so I agree with that. But we live in a country where millions of people do not believe in Jesus, and they're not just going to believe in Jesus because you say that you're a collective group that exists. There's no way that's going to happen.
We can take that beyond. We live in a world 100%. Where the same case is real.
100%. 100%. This definition only works if your presupposition is that of a Christian. And it only works if you live in a theocracy, not a democracy.
Right.
And as much as we want, we can't. Listen, here's the thing. Show me in the Bible, in the New Testament, in the Bible, but let's just go with New Testament because Jesus actually came into human history. All right. Show me in the New Testament where Jesus imposes on people to believe in him. Mm-hmm. Where does he do that? The one person who could have done that and could have done it righteously, you never see Jesus do that. You get statements like John 6, he feeds 5,000 with some loaves and fish. They want to make him king. He knows what's in the heart of man. So he has this back and forth discussion with them. Basically, and then he eventually says, look, I'm the bread of life that came down from heaven. So you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood, right? He's talking to, it said people were offended like, man, I can't handle this. Now, if you look at John 6 in the text, it will say this term, and many of his disciples walked away. Right. Not people, not just people, many of his disciples walked away.
Yeah.
They heard the teaching and was like, man, I can't. And then Jesus looked at the 12 and said, are you going to leave too? And then Simon famously says, where are we going to go? You have the keys to eternal life. We don't have anywhere to go. Jesus never imposes that. The only thing that he does is send the disciples into the neighborhoods to cast out demons and heal the sick.
And he tells them if they go and they get this, dust off their feet and keep it pushing.
To keep it moving.
Right.
Keep it moving, right?
Yeah. He don't tell them to turn them into a Christian household.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. And this is the problem with this. This definition and this idea of Christian nationalism, it stokes at our hearts because, man, as Christians, we want to see the nation submitted to Christ.
That's the thing is they're using stuff that is going to happen, stuff that will come.
Like every knee will bow, every tongue confess.
I mean,
yes.
This is honestly, this is the equivalent. This is the equivalent of saying, hey, guess what? We're about to start a community where there's no tears, no pain, only joy, no more sorrows. This is going to be the new Christian community. Come over here and join us. There's going to be no more pain, no more tears, no more sorrow, just joy in the Lord because sin will be gone. And we'd all be like, y'all's crazy. Like, that's not happening until the Lord returns.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But
and when that does happen, it's called cult, right? When we hear that, when people do that, it's a cult.
But with Christian nationalism, we like, oh, yeah, we could do this.
Yeah.
Get out of here. It's the same thing, man. It's the same thing.
Oh, man. Man, somebody stop me. I just think it's but you know what it is, though? You know what's actually the most saddest thing that I'm not hearing a lot of people say? When you say America's a Christian nation, or was a Christian, or any of that stuff, right? The problem with that is when you look at the history of our nation, it is largely unbiblical in its actions. In fact, the primary way that America's a Christian, the primary way, is in profession.
Yeah.
Profession of Jesus, right?
Yep.
Jesus has a category of people that honor him with their lips, but their hearts are far from them. So Jesus would never call you a Christian because you said you believe in him, but you did the opposite in your actions and responsibility. Jesus made the connection, if you love me, obey my commandments.
Right.
The Bible does not have, now don't get me wrong, this is great, none of us do it perfectly. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about blatant, unrepentant, just invisible to the person's sin. Like you just don't even think it's sinful because you made a profession of faith, right? We would never give anyone that kind of credibility, and the Bible doesn't, right? So when you say America's a Christian nation, you can only say that with conviction in comparison to other countries. Okay, we're more of a Christian nation than these countries in Africa, than than China, than this and that. You got it. You get it. But we're never called to compare ourselves to other people. Nope. We compare ourselves to the Word, to God, to Jesus.
That's right.
We're imitators of God, not imitators of other nations.
Right. And even as a nation, that's what we're supposed to do.
100%.
I mean, that's what he did with the Jews. How did 100%. They compare themselves? By the law.
By the law. 100%. So when you say we were a Christian nation, you're saying we're a nation that has obeyed Jesus. But the history of America, that is not true. It doesn't mean that everyone no one obeyed Jesus. No, of course not. Oh, but what it means is we profess to believe in him, but our hearts were far from him. In many ways, in the Christian church, in the history of America, and we see all of this, right? All the stuff that you call woke now is all true. It ain't woke to the Lord, though. It's all reality. So when you say that this is a Christian nation, and people can think about all the atrocities done by the church even, what are you saying about Christianity and about faith in Jesus? You're teaching people that you can profess to believe, do the most heinous things, and there are no consequences because you're still a Christian.
Yeah.
That's what you're teaching people. So no wonder you have all these people, the same Pew Research that I read from will have all these things that 60% of millennials are walking away from the church. Why wouldn't they? Because to be a Christian from the standard of American history is to not have to really love your neighbor as yourself. To not have to really do good to everyone, especially those in the household of faith. To not have to treat others the way you want to be treated. To not have to go back and ask for forgiveness. You don't have to do any of that. Those are things that Jesus taught is what it means to be a Christian. Those are things that Scripture talks about. It never talks about these things that we're rallied up against. So my concern is that you take Christianity and you make it something that is lawless. We have to be honest and say, yes, we may have been a country that professed faith more than other nations or other continents. I'll give us that. If that's what you mean by Christian, then yes, this was a Christian nation. But if you're talking about actual obedience to Jesus that is seen clearly in the way that you treat other people, oh, no, we can't say that.
I mean, but I know this is not your point, but to say that we're a Christian nation, at least our founding documents have to be Christian.
100%.
And they're not.
They're not.
Like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, like where are those found in the Bible?
No, James 3 says tame your tongue, fam.
I mean, even freedom of religion. Like, we're not
100%.
free to worship everybody.
Right.
You know,
100%.
and anything. Like, that's just not the case when it comes to Scripture. So
remember the Treaty of Tripoli? Back in 17 something?
Yeah. Now, we broke that down. We definitely broke that down.
They said we're
in
not
our
a Christian
episodes.
nation.
Yeah, for sure.
So you're right, though. There's just the founding documents. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm fine with the documents. I'm fine with them. I'm fine with all of that stuff.
We benefit from them.
We benefit from them.
But it's not Christian.
But they're not Christian. And to act like they are Christian is basically you who profess to be a Christian are saying, I don't know what it means to be a Christian.
Right. And that's where the challenge comes in, I think, for us, at least for me, definitely, and I know for you, but is where the fusion happens, where you're like, oh, how many years ago was it where men like James White and others were saying, this cannot, the Constitution of the United States cannot stand without a Christian moral society. So a Christian moral society is needed for the Constitution to be maintained and to be acted out as it was intended to be. Yet this thing is not biblical, right? It's contrary to the Bible, yet 100%. We're Christians saying that it cannot last unless Christians uphold it. So you're fusing the two together, making them seem like they can only survive and live together. And when you do that with something, you're initially making it one. That's 100%. That's what we doing.
It's a wrong syncretism is what it is, right?
That's what it is. Syncretism, perfect word.
It's a bad syncretism, right? So here's the other side, and here's where we as believers get caught in Christian nationalism. This is what I've realized as I've looked into this and I've watched it, people talk about. I haven't finished this book, so I don't know what he thinks. But based on the reviews that I've heard, I know what I think already. I probably won't finish it, to be honest. But the other thing that I think we need to take into consideration when you talk about this kind of perspective in Christian, what I've noticed is what they do is, and this is where we get got, this is where Christians, genuine Christians fall into this, like, yeah, that's what we want, right? They talk about Christian nationalism is, if I'm a Christian, I want the greater good for my neighbor. Loving my neighbor wants the greater good for them. And that's why we want laws that will create the greater good for them. And as a Christian, you hear that and you think, absolutely.
For sure.
I do want that. I want the greater good for my neighbor. I want to do that, right? Loving my neighbor is wanting the greatest good for them. And so that greater good has to also be respected, has to come through the laws that govern our society, right?
But we're also supposed to consider the interests of others above our own.
100%, right? So that's where we get pulled in. Like, well, that's what we want as a Christian. So this is why we vote the way we vote. We want those laws to pass. But there's two problems with this idea. That's true in the sense, but the question is that how the Bible tells us to love our neighbors, though? Is that how the Bible tells us to love our neighbors? I would submit to you maybe, but not necessarily. Now, when I say maybe, here's what I'm saying maybe. I don't think we should vote for laws that we think totally disregard what God says. So I agree with that. But that's not the loving our neighbor that the Bible talks about is not the imposition of laws. It's not. And the reason why is because the law never changes the heart. Jesus is after the hearts of people, not the obedience to a particular law.
That's a bomb drop.
He's not after that. He's not after the event. And let me tell you why. You got 2 Corinthians 11 where Satan is called an angel of light. He appears to be righteous. Okay? He appears to be righteous. So Satan is okay with morality. And it said even his representatives appear as angels of light.
Right.
He's okay with morality.
Right.
Morality does not offend him, but morality motivated by the Messiah most certainly does.
Right. That's why morality keeps so many people from coming to Christ.
That's why it keeps so many people from coming, because the law, you think I obey the laws. When you hear, well, I'm a good person, I pay my taxes, I don't cheat on my wife. These are all laws, right? You have to remember, we live in a land of laws. We have federal, state, local, county, city, all province. There's law. We're always surrounded by a number of laws, but these don't change people's hearts.
No.
And proof of it is Romans 7. Paul says, look, the law produced the covetousness in me. He said the law is good, and then it explained what sin is. But once I know what it is, the human nature in me wants to do the very thing the law says not to do. And therefore now the law cannot do what it's intended to do. Now he's talking about the Mosaic law, right? That's wholly just directly from God on how people are supposed to act, and saying that law can't change hearts, but it can reveal where hearts are prone to sin.
Right.
So why would we think that American law is not going to do the same thing?
Yeah.
So you take away. Go ahead.
I was just going to add real quick. We have three major powers at play in the United States, so that
100%.
So that one can't overthrow the others. You know, there's three. So even when you consider, like, Scripture talking about how the Lord turns the heart of a king, America is set up in a way where that can't even happen. No. Like, the Lord can't just turn the heart of a king.
That's right, right? And that's true, though, right?
He has to turn the heart of the king, the Supreme Court, Congress, and the king. You know what I'm saying? Like, Senate, like, there's a whole lot that has to be turned. America was set up in a way to preserve the way we live, but it is not biblical. It's not a Christian principle. It's not Christian. It's not a Christian way of living.
Right, right.
We would have a king.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's
but people treat the president as a king. That's what they treat the president. Remember they were calling Trump Cyrus?
But he's far from it. He's far from it. Yeah.
Far from it. So I'm glad you said that, because we already have this test case in American history. Do you know what Jim Crow was? Jim Crow were laws.
Yeah.
That Christians backed up for the greater good of society.
Yeah.
And they didn't change any hearts. In fact, they just exposed the wickedness in people's hearts. You can create laws that you think are for the good of society and not love your neighbors at all.
For sure.
Not love your neighbors at all. And let's just be honest. There are laws most of the laws are good for society. There are consequences for actions in light of Romans 13. We already have laws in place that you can't commit murder, you can't sell drugs, you can't do a lot of things that are already in place, right? But here's the other problem I have with this, right? Because when I was watching, Toby Sumter did a pushback on, Jonathan Lehman wrote a paper against Christian nationalism, and there were a couple people who did a pushback against it. Toby Sumter from Cross Politic was one of them. And he did a pushback, and he used Romans 13 as his, submitting to the governing authorities. And in particular, I want to read this to you. This is what he used as sort of his justifiable case
And
for Christian
before you
nationalism.
go on, Lehman's also been on cross politics.
He
You know what I'm
has.
saying?
And Toby Sumter did say, well,
Right.
this is not, the guy's been good to me personally. Woo, 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 I don't have any issue. So he said, basically, see this critique as a loving pushback. So I'm not in any way questioning Toby's motive or heart. I mean, for the little I know of him, I like to do. So
Yeah,
this
me
isn't
too.
like,
Yeah.
this isn't, I don't have a problem with him. And again, like people say about me, man, I love your stuff. I don't always agree with you. I don't always agree with him. But all intents, I bang with him. But on this, I definitely disagree with him. Let me tell you why. So his motive, he changed. He said Christian nationalism is. He said, let me offer a third way: lordship nationalism, right? Which is what we were talking about earlier. But he gave it this name, lordship nationalism. And this is what he says from Romans 13. This is the well-known passage about submitting to the governing authorities. You got Romans 13. You got 1 Peter 2, and one or two other places where. But those are the two main ones that talk about honor the emperor, submit to everyone, submit to the governing authorities, all this stuff, right? Here's what Toby Sumter says, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, but this is kind of what he did with this passage. I'm going to read. Let me just read it real quick, and then you'll see what I mean. Let every person, this is Romans 13, beginning verse 1. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, and the avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes. For the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. All right. So Toby Sumter takes that in a couple phrases in that. And he basically justifies Christian nationalism or lordship nationalism by saying that the rulers, they are appointed by God, right?
As ministers.
As ministers. And he calls them ministers of God in verse 6 of Romans 13.
Or God's magistrate.
Yeah, God's magistrate. But he used the term ministers of God. And he basically says that alone means that we should demand of our civil servants the submission and total authority to Jesus Christ and all that. I agree with that. I think we should, that's the goal. That's the goal. Mm-hmm. We know that's not going to happen in this life, but that's the goal, right? That's not the problem. This is where we get sucked in. Yeah, I agree with that. But here's the problem. If you take what he's saying, well, look what it says. They're ministers of God, right? In 21st century America, in a relatively civil society, that makes sense, right? But let's imagine if you're a first century Jew hearing this when he wrote it, and the governing authorities are Rome. Mm-hmm. That's the occupied governing authorities when Paul wrote this. As a matter of fact, it's the book of Romans, right? Rome is the governing authority he's talking about. They don't have a political system in Judaism. They have the Sanhedrin, and that functions sort of the moral code and some of the laws and stuff. But it was Rome. Rome was the occupied authority. And then even the Sanhedrin were Pharisees and so they weren't people who they would have considered ministers of Christ. So the way Toby Sumter describes it is if they're ministers of Christ doing Christ's will. Now he wouldn't say that, but the way he comes off is like, but bro, when you read this to a first century Jew, they're thinking, man, submit to the governing authorities. They're ministers of, you talking about the Romans? They killed Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. These people, they would have never processed that as their ministers of Christ in a way that they demand them submit to Jesus Christ because they're ministers. That's not what he meant. But then here's the other problem. But here's the other problem with this interpretation. The Bible is written in many languages across the world, not just American. So Romans 13 is in every credible Bible in the world.
Right.
Every credible translation in every language, there will be a Romans 13 that says this exact same thing. So if you're a Christian living in Iran or Iraq or Syria or or China, and you read this, are you to demand that these civil servants, these civil magistrates, submit to Christ because they by default are ministers of God?
But you know what, though? It's odd because rarely do you find in Scripture the Lord instructing you on how to hold someone else accountable.
100%.
You know, it's like the instruction there is for you.
Yeah.
Like they're ministers unto you, meaning they help keep you in check. You know what I'm saying? Like the Lord has placed them there to help keep you in check and help build you unto Christ, whether that be through persecution, suffering, or whatever. It doesn't matter, but they're there to serve you by serving. They're there to serve the Lord by serving you unto Him. And it's not always done by someone who is a Christian.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like the Lord uses men and women
100%.
to build men and women unto Himself who are not Christian.
100%, bro.
It happens all the time.
All the time.
Like if that were the case, if the conservative pastors didn't know that was the case, they wouldn't have had James Lindsay at their conferences.
100%, bro. 100%. So to succinctly say what Strack is saying is that statement, Romans 13:6, is a statement of God's sovereignty, not a statement of it's not a salvific statement.
Boom.
It's not a statement of salvation and we should demand that they submit. It's a statement of sovereignty.
It's not even a national statement.
No, it's a statement of God's authority over all people, that the governing authorities, because think about this, even in the craziest nation, you will not find in the China, whatever, you will not find laws that say, go ahead and rape people. It's okay. It's the law. No. Go ahead and kill people. It's the law. No, they may do it, but it's not written in their laws, right? So even in the most evil, what we would call evil regimes, there are laws in place to punish. If you're a Muslim and you steal, they cut your hands off, fam.
Facts.
They cut your hands off, right?
Yeah.
So like there are laws that God would say these laws are there to protect people. Now people go against those laws.
I would argue that a lot of nations that would not even touch on the idea of being Christian actually are more righteous in their laws than America is.
100%. Yeah.
A lot of them, especially down in Africa.
Bro, their laws are no joke. I mean, we have the highest prison population. And a lot of people are in prison for elongated prison sentences, not because they deserve them, but because of just the unjustness in the way that we practice law. It's the system, right? But that's woke if you say that. So that's woke. But this is what we're getting at. So when you take these, and it's disappointing when you take these scriptures and realize, fam, that's not what it's trying to say. So Christian national. So there's one more thing about Christian nationalism that I think is actually the most damaging to me. And again, I haven't read his whole book, but I heard him talk a few times. I heard enough to know. Okay, I see what you're getting at. I don't need to spend my time reading your scriptural justification because I already disagree with your foundational premise. But the other thing that's the most dangerous to me is, and I've alluded to this, but I want to make this point clearer. It's you've reduced loving your neighbor down to laws. I want to explain why this is really dangerous. In Luke chapter 10, right, we have the story of the Good Samaritan. This is a very popular narrative. This is a very popular story. In this story, the story starts off where a religious leader, a scribe, walks up and asks Jesus. Here's Jesus teaching. And he says, what are the commands? And he says, love the Lord with all your God, love your neighbor as yourself. Right? And he says, who is my neighbor? What I love is Jesus said, you know the commandments, this and this. How do you read it? Right? This is how do you read? I love that question. Because basically Jesus understands how you interpret the law will determine how you obey it. That's a huge question. I wish more people had, how am I reading this? How do I read this, right? How do I understand it, right? So then the dude said, well, who is my neighbor? And Jesus tells a story where a man was walking down the street. He was beaten and robbed and left for dead. So the priest and the Levite walked by. These would be two men who know the law, who are responsible in some way, shape, or form to know the law of God. They see the dude walk past him. A Samaritan comes and picks him up, puts him on his horse, takes him to a place where he can get looked after, pays for it and all of that, and then says, I'll come back the next day and do that. And then Jesus said, who do you out of these three men was a neighbor? And they said, the third. And he said, go and do likewise. That's important. Go and do likewise. All right. Let me give you a Christian nationalist interpretation of Luke chapter 10. Here's the way they talk about changing laws and doing this, and this is for the good of society. Here's what a Christian nationalist interpretation of that passage. Here's what they would have done. The dude walks down the street. They see him. The guy sees that he's beaten, and he goes and tells the police there's a guy on the street. And then they talk to the governor. We need to create some laws and put more soldiers on this street or whatever because people are getting robbed and hurt and beat. Okay? That's a good thing. Is that loving your neighbor? Yes. Change the laws to try to prevent that from happening. That's good in and of itself. But that's not what Jesus taught, right? What did he teach? Loving your neighbor is about personal sacrifice, personal investment, personal involvement. It's not going to the head of whatever. It's not going to Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin and say, man, y'all need to put... It was personal. So the guy saw him. He personally checked on him. He had to touch him. Knowing that, and again, according to this is a narrative, but knowing that you make yourself unclean. Now, he was a Samaritan, so he wasn't following Jewish laws in the same way. But he has to pick this guy up. I imagine the guy's not little. He's probably heavy. He has to pick the guy up and put him on his horse. And then he has to, camel, whatever. He has to get there slowly because the guy's in pain. He doesn't know if the guy's going to make it or not. So he takes his time carefully, taking him to an inn where he helps the guy get carried in, puts him down, makes sure he's okay, and then says, pays him, and then says, whatever you do, I'll give you money to do that. It was all personal. When Jesus said, go and do likewise, it was, we need to be personally involved. And what happens with Christian nationalism, it takes the personal out of the greater good and makes it about just laws. Let's change laws that are good, but those laws are good for us and they are good for society, but that's not going to make these people be like, oh, what a greater law, because many of them don't want to submit to those laws because that's just the human nature within them. So you're taking away a huge responsibility of going and doing likewise because you're not helping people. You're not reaching out to people. You're not meeting them where they are like Jesus did. You're creating laws that will be better for them whether they like it or not.
Right.
There's no personal in it.
Yeah, I mean it'd be like you get sent to go clean your room, and instead of cleaning your room like you're supposed to, you reorganize it, tear down walls, and do all kind of stuff, and end up making more of a mess than you ever were supposed to do in the beginning. You were supposed to just clean your room, but you go the extra step because you think doing more is better instead of just doing what you're supposed to do, which is obedience. The Lord requires obedience, not sacrifice. So you have people trying to sacrifice an entire country unto the Lord, and that's not what he's requiring. He's requiring obedience. Right.
Yeah. And that's the point. And that's what I think the whole idea of Christian nationalism is. Hold on real quick. Abstract acoustics. Hey, relax, fam. You wilding right now, fam. You don't got to cuss in our joint, man. You comment a lot on our show, and we appreciate your contribution and your comments. But you wilding right now, fam. Relax, bro. You know what we about. You follow us. You listen to us. We don't need all this in the comment section, fam. If that's what you're going to be at, scram, bro. Scram, fam. We don't need that. We treat you. We've always treated you with respect and all that. Don't come in the comment section cussing and dropping, talking about this and that. We know what the laws are. That's not what we're talking about. You misunderstanding what we're trying to explain about Romans 13. We know we live in a fallen world and people go against it. But you're wilding right now, fam. Chill out, bro. I've never seen you act like this before. Chill out, fam. You must be high or something. If you're not, then be high, because you wilding right now, bro. Chill out, bro.
I don't know what's going on. What's going on right now?
He's in the comment section. He's just in the comment section wilding. It's like, chill out, fam. You know what kind of show we run. You know what we do, man. We don't need all that, bro. We don't need that,
somebody
man.
needs chin check. You're
going to get it here. You're going to get it. And I say it to your face. I don't saying it because I'm in the camera. I don't have no problem. I'm the same dude on the internet as I am in person. But anyway, the point that I'm saying is like we're supposed to do good to everyone, especially those in the households of faith. But the Bible didn't have in mind the changing of laws, fam. It had the changing of lives through relationship, personal contact. That's the challenge. And so I think what this does, Christian nationalism, is actually, because you're trying to do it through laws, I think it's really Mosaic nationalism. It's not Christian nationalism, it's Mosaic nationalism. It's let's change people through law and not grace, man. And let me say this, man. People, I don't know what this is. We've talked about this when it comes to like winsomeness. People, do you realize that when Jesus said these things, or when the biblical writers in the New Testament wrote these things, they wrote stuff in a hostile environment. People were getting killed because they believed in Jesus. None of us in America are getting killed because we believe in Jesus. Maybe we're losing some livelihood because we don't agree with the cultural sexual ethic, and that is a bad thing. There's some of those things that happen. But none of us are in fear. I mean, these people, when Jesus said these things, people were getting killed. And First Peter is written to all the Jews in the dispersion, right? This means these are people who were fleeing for their lives. That's why he says stuff like, if you suffer as a Christian, that's a good thing. Because people were afraid. In Hebrews 10:24, when it says, do not forsake gathering together as some have come to do, it wasn't like today where people just don't feel like going to church. People were afraid to go to church.
Right.
Their lives were in danger by gathering together. You know, Paul talks it in 2 Corinthians 12. Paul will walk you through all of the ways that he did that. Got beat, did all this stuff. Like, so the Bible is not written to a group of Christians who are fat-catting, and now we need to step it up because, or disregard these things because that was then, this is now. Their culture was presumably much more hostile than our culture is today.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Much more hostile. And when Jesus said, do good to everyone, treat others the way you want to be treated, to love your neighbor as yourself, go and do likewise. This was in a culture way more hostile than ours. Bama's is just soft. To be honest, man, it's just, we just soft. And you've lost, you're treating the commandments of God as optional, like this optional community church. Because the reality is, what you're most afraid of is not God not getting glory, but about you losing particular comforts that you can give God glory when you have them. That's what it's about for real. That's why it's always about economics. It's about getting out there and vote. What about getting out there and vet? Most of these dudes, you don't even know what they really believe, right? It's like it's all about power and comfort. It's power on one side of it, but then it's about like economic comfort and laws. Like, look, fam, I don't want to live in a crazy society either, but by the grace of God, I'm gonna glorify him if we do, because I can't control that. And whether you believe it or not, you can't control it either, because God sovereignly will let it happen.
If people were just honest, they would say they vote to preserve a certain lifestyle.
That's what it is. It's a lifestyle.
Why people vote. Yeah.
It's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. It's trying, and I'm not saying that's wrong in and of itself. Right. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a socialist. I'm good with capitalism, but it has its flaws. I'm not afraid to call out its flaws, though. Ephesians 5:11 is my cultural engagement. Expose the deeds of darkness. I don't expose the deeds of darkness of the left only or the right only, but everybody. I'll call out whatever. I'll say whatever, because that's what we do. And it's just, and so that's why we say theological, because you care more about a way of life, right, than the way to life. And that's the problem. It's a lot of these Christians don't care if people go to hell or not. They just don't want to live in a socialist country. They don't want to lose their freedoms. I can tell you right now, Strack said this earlier about, the Constitution is not American. There's no Bible verses. I can tell you right now, God is not up in heaven wanting to maintain gun control laws, gun laws. He doesn't care about your Second Amendment right, man.
That's right.
That's not a priority in the scriptures. I'm not saying hey, listen, if we live in a country where they let you have guns if you want them, fine. I'm with it. That's not my point. But my point is that's not, it's constitutional morality. We need Christitutional obedience, and that's what's missing. And so Christian nationalism, call me what you want, call me woke, all of it, but I will never, ever, ever submit to that ideology. I'm not submitting to the left's ideology of stuff, because they be wildin'. There's no way I'm submitting to any of that. I got a bar on a mixtape that say, never have I ever voted Democrat or thought they ever gave a crap. Been selling dreams for so long, I opted out of taking naps. So I'm not talking about I'm riding with them. Don't think I ain't riding but I ain't riding with them either. Because they say Christian, they're deceiving you. At least the left ain't claiming to be Christian. The right is the ones claiming to be Christian. So they're the wolf. Ironically, the wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, I'm not saying he is, but it just happened to be that way. It's a visual bar. I don't know this dude. And when I saw him on Cross Politics, he seemed like a humble guy. He seemed like he loves the Lord.
I appreciated a lot of the things he was saying.
I did too.
I could sit down and listen to his perspective on Christian nationalists and be like, okay, I can understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Funny enough. It's just some of the other stuff that's just being said is just too wild, man.
It's just wild.
And I haven't read the book either, so.
Yeah, I'll read some of it, but I'm probably not. I get things for references, not because I really want to read into this stuff. I'd rather watch a guy give 4 or 5 interviews about his book on YouTube, and I get a sense of what he's talking about and what he means. So.
Yeah, you hear it from the horse's mouth.
All right, so hopefully, we're going to leave this topic alone for a while. I feel like we've hit this a lot, but it's just been what people are talking about. It's just that. But we got other things to talk about, some other stuff that some of it will be crazy left field stuff. Some of it will be what's happening in the culture. But this will probably be the last for a while, at least, unless something really crazy happens. There's other topics I want to hit. But we felt like we needed to swing back around and pull up and talk about this issue because for us, for Strack and I, this is essentially, we've been saying this for years.
Yeah.
And when we said it, people either called us woke or we just ain't this, or they question if I was a pastor for real, all this stuff. And it's like, all right, cool. And then it becomes it's all people are talking about.
Yep.
And you see, and I think it's important, brothers and sisters, I don't care where you're at politically, vote your conscience, right? But who you vote for is not necessarily discernment. Don't lose your discernment. Don't be afraid to call out the deeds of darkness on all sides. Just because you might agree with this side more than this other side, it doesn't mean your side don't got some darkness on it. And you gotta be, just as a believer, you gotta stay balanced. You gotta be able to say, hey, this is wrong. This is wrong. I'm still voting this way because I believe in these values more than those values. Cool. But this side, my side is wrong. And I'm not going, that's what you gotta do, fam.
Yeah, be careful with a false sense of loyalty, too, because if politics is all about presenting the best ideas for society, then, you should be willing to go with the best ideas.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not always going to be your side that presents the best ideas. And if you think that your side always presents the best ideas, you might want to just re-examine. I'm just saying. It's just a fact.
Yeah. You might want to let us cross-examine.
Word.
Bust that head. All right, man, we appreciate y'all riding with us. Don't forget, check us out on Twitter. I've actually been enjoying Twitter again, bro. I've lost 100 subscribers in like 2 months because I hardly tweet anymore. I'm just, me, I'm just tired of it. I enjoy doing this better. But lately, the last 2 or 3 days, since James Lindsay's been back, I've been tweeting more. I've been enjoying Twitter, so I might swing back. I might pull up to my old neighborhood. I live in YouTube Village right now. But I might pull up the Twitter Boulevard and see what's popping, or Twitter Avenue. I'm still on Facebook Boulevard. I still got a condo over there. But so I'm back on Twitter again. So check me out there. Don't forget to go to Abner's Brush and get all that good stuff, man. You can get the handcrafted photo. Like, listen, man, bless your spouse. Mother's Day's coming up. Bless your mom in the spring. You can get a picture painted of your family. That's going to be dope. Like, that's what you need in your life. Don't get me wrong. You got cameras and all that. We got that. But you don't got the authentic joint.
Right.
Authentiste. So go there. Don't forget, go to KurtKennedy.com. You'll find all my stuff there, everything there. I'm about to start writing back on Substack.
Yeah.
In December, I've been chilling with that. I'm working on a book right now, too. So it's a lot going on. So I haven't been doing a bunch of stuff. And I'm trying to finish this music project. So all that to be said. All right. Don't forget, man, like and subscribe. If you like what we did, cool. If you don't, you unfollow us, cool. Thanks for the memories. But we trying to get there, man. Keep us going. Keep us living. Keep us alive.
Keep us in prayer.
Keep us in prayer, for real. That's what I was about to say, too. Because we need that, man. But we appreciate y'all. Thanks so much for giving us your time on a Thursday night, riding with us. We appreciate that. And thanks for letting us always try to bless you. I'm sorry I didn't get to a lot of the comments. I was going to put some comments up. But sometimes when I do that, we was just in the zone. So, having said that, man, y'all enjoy your indigenous taken from other people Thanksgiving Day tomorrow. Get that dish that you wanted to eat. All that good stuff. We're going to keep it moving. Corn pudding for me. Would you say it was corn what for you?
It's the same thing.
It's like pretty much the same thing,
sweet
right?
corn,
all right. Sweet corn.
pudding.
Go to KurtKennedy.com and download the mixtape. We talking about bars. Balls, baby. Straight balls like you get from the ice cream truck. All right. We out of here, y'all.